So I'd love to welcome Pete Boardman to talk about 10 years of entomology in the Natural England Field Unit. So Pete was my predecessor in my previous job, working for the Field Studies Council, and I'm really excited to hear about what he's been doing since he left the FSC, because Pete actually gets a lot of credit for getting me into invertebrates. It was going on some of the courses that he was hosting and facilitating some probably about 8-10 years ago that got me into invertebrates in the first place. So Pete, over to you, and really excited to hear about Natural England's field units work.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Kieran. So I'm going to talk a bit about the Natural England Field Unit today, otherwise known as NEFU or NEFU, depending how you pronounce it. I'll give a little bit of background first. So the most modern iteration of NEFU was founded in 2014, hence it's the 10th anniversary this year, as a response really to a perceived falling of ecological skills across the organisation. It's important to recognise that it wasn't the first England Field Unit. People like Alan Stubbs and Martin Drake worked for the organisation back in the Nature Conservancy Council days as part of a field unit that at that time worked across England, Wales and Scotland. But the England Field Unit was broken up at the start of English Nature's tenure. So initially, when the field unit was reborn, we recruited internally across the organisation 12 ecologists in 2014. And the plan really was then to recruit externally from 2015, but roughly a 10-year period was the original plan. And so everybody would be cycled through the field unit for a year, and a new set of recruits, experienced ecologists, would come into the organisation. However, that never really happened due to austerity. And so the vast majority of the people who were recruited in 2016 are now still in the field unit. So what are our current responsibilities? 70% of our work is carrying out condition assessments on SSSIs. So this isn't just invertebrate work, it's botanical work, it's bryological work, mycological work, a range of other things as well. But this is in response to the Environment Act and the amount of condition assessments we have to complete by 2028. So it's a big majority of our work these days. 20% of what we do is based around learning and capability building in the organisation. So we're constantly trying to offer opportunities to people. And we also support quite a range of different work. We're fairly fundamental behind Natural England's DNA work. We supply a lot of time for that. We run an ecological training programme annually, which we'll talk more about a little bit later. Obviously non-entomological, but we also run a number of field identification skills certificates for FISCs on behalf of the BSBI. And we run an annual intake 20 staff from elsewhere in the organisation who each have 20 days in the calendar year to support us and also to gain experience of habitats and species around the country. That work covers the whole of England, so it could be from Lindisfarne to the Lizard, could be anywhere in England. The remaining 10% of our work supports the 12 area teams that we have in Natural England through a project called Priority Places. And that could be a range of things, but it gives us the opportunity to use our skills with our colleagues in area teams and carry out specific training. It could be a baseline survey as well, a range of other work. It could be single species work. Whatever their request is, we try and help. So in terms of the entomologists, so when I started in 2016, I was the sole entomologist in the field unit. There had been at least one entomologist in 2015, and I'll talk you through who we currently have very shortly. But our year, and even though Natural England uses the sort of accounting year for budgets, we generally go with the calendar year. So January to March, we're looking down microscopes, identifying stuff from previous surveys. Then we start to plan for the current year, and we have to write risk assessments and seek permissions and work out the logistics, because it can be quite complicated with people traveling from all over the country. April to September is generally our field season, during which we'll carry out 3 to 4 visits per site, the assigned sites we've got, or the variety of other stuff that goes on during our field season, as you'll see a little bit later. And then October to December, that's when we really start our identification work, and it's just time looking down the microscope at that period of time. So I'll introduce you to the current field unit group of entomologists. So firstly, Nick. Nick looks at beetles and bugs and a range of other things, but primarily he's a coleopterist, spends most of his time doing that. He's based in Worcester. On the right hand of the screen is Chris. She's our aculeate hymenopterist, spends the time looking at bees, wasps and ants, plus she also does quite a number of our odonata assemblages, and she's based in Sussex. On the left is Vicky. Vicky is our spider and harvestman person, so she spends a lot of time using vacuum samplers and finding all sorts of species of spiders and harvestmen that contribute towards our assemblage work. Then we have Jo on the right hand side. She looks at saprosite beetles and a few other beetle groups. She's part-time, and she's a field unit functional manager, so that cuts down the amount of field work time she has, but she still contributes an awful lot in a year. That's me on the left. So I do flies and bugs and various other groups and small orders. I'm also a functional manager, so I don't get to spend all my time out in the field doing entomology, but I still get to spend a reasonable amount. I look after the field unit intake, which we'll talk in more detail about shortly. We're also able to call on the skills of a few excellent entomologists in the organisation. Adrian is based in Norfolk. He's really good on moths and flies and bees and all sorts of stuff. So we always try and work with Adrian whenever we can. Julian also is a very good and experienced entomologist. He's based up in Yorkshire and comes out with us a few times a year. And then we have people who've been in the intake previously, the alumni. Some of those come out with us on a variety of jobs. And they sort of sign up to 1 or 2 jobs and come out for 3 or 4 days at a time. So that's really useful sort of extra staff to help with what we do. So that's the current team. We see lots and lots of interesting things, lots and lots of fantastic invertebrates during our time surveying around the country. And I could spend really the rest of today showing you photographs of the variety of things we find. But obviously, I won't be doing that. But it can be quite overwhelming at times with the amount of habitats that we work in different parts of the country. And certainly when you start and you go to a habitat you've not been to, or a part of the country you've not been to for the first time, and take a little bit of catching up and working out what you're looking at. It's good fun. Over the last decade, we've found all sorts of new species on sites and new species device counties. Again, I'll just show a couple of them for sort of illustration purposes. This is the flecked general soldier fly that we came across on probably the weirdest triple SI that I've ever worked on. Excuse me. It's sandwiched between a brick pit and big industrial plant that does metal fabrication, and you sort of have to drive through an industrial estate to get to it, go through a locked gate. But it turns out even what on paper is a really sort of unpromising site turned out to house some really interesting invertebrates. And I think one of the things we find, because a lot of the sites we go on are private sites, SSIs that don't have public access or very limited public access, often we're the first people to go there and survey in a number of years. So we always find some interesting things, and that's a pretty cool part of the job. This is Harbury Spoil in Warwickshire. It's a site of two halves. One half is managed by Butterfly Conservation and is one of the best sites in Warwickshire for a whole range of interesting Lepidoptera, grizzle skipper there, six-belted clearwing, dark green fritillary, and it was all, you know, it's absolutely wonderful seeing those species, but they're not actually the majority of things that we need to look for. We're generally looking for bees and spiders and flies and beetles and bugs. They're mainly the sort of 5 groups that we need to find and target to be able to do the invertebrate assemblages that we do, and I'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. On the other side of the site is Harbury Spoil. It's owned by the local wildlife trust, and we found a lovely little hunchback fly there that's new to Warwickshire, which was a cool thing to find. So this is sort of the fairly typical situation that we face. So we are given a site, in this particular case, the River Eden and tributaries, SSI, up in Cumbria, fabulous river network of gravels and wet sands, particularly important for a range of flies that are associated with the W114 assemblage. And so we will go and survey a site like that and visit it probably 3 or 4 times during a year, or sometimes stretched over 2 years, depending on availability and weather and all sorts of things. But we'll also try and get the best value for money for our visits, and we will work with other people. So for instance, at this site, we did some work collecting UK barcode of life specimens for the Natural History Museum ongoing project. Again, more about that later in the talk. But also we're able to use it as a training opportunity for the intake, so that we get an absolute maximum value for our travel up to Cumbria. The stuff we got, lots of nice flies. These are all crane flies that came from the site. Nephritoma, Dictinidia, Eleophylla, Hopla labis, and a nice Dichronomia ornata. So all species that are part of the W114 assemblage. So we were able to show that the SSI there was favourable for the W114. It's the first time it had been surveyed in over 20 odd years. So the area team were very, very happy. And then the majority of those specimens also went to the Natural History Museum as part of the UK Barcode of Life. So they certainly got a lot of value from that survey. This is Hoffwood SSI in Herefordshire. And again, it's another site where we had a couple of invertebrate assemblages that we were targeting. The one I took on was the W126 seepage assemblage. There you have some rather lovely springs and seepages and tufa in this occasion. So as well as doing the W126 seepage survey, we were able to take the intake for some training and again collect some specimens for the UK Barcode of Life. Really, really lovely habitat. We're actually going again next week with a new set of intake people to show them introduce them to two-fur and seepages and springs. We work in all sorts of habitats, coastal as well. Our responsibility sort of stops at salt marsh. So this was a survey that we did in Morecambe Bay a few years ago. Wherever we go, obviously we're collecting lots and lots of material. That's really probably the easier part of the job. You know, most people can swing a net around and pop things up. The time is actually taken back at the lab. So processing the specimens, here you can see there's 6 little containers that were part of the Morecambe Bay survey. And then we do like a specimen swap shop later in the year. So as I said earlier, the members of the field unit have their own particular specialisms. So the spiders, obviously, which wouldn't be pinned, they'd be in alcohol, they would go to Vicky, and the aculeates would go to Chris, and the beetles would go to either a combination of Nick and Joe or Nick. And I would retain the flies and the bugs. And then likewise, they will do their sorting from the jobs that we've been on, and they will send me flies, and they'll send me various other bits and pieces as well. So this is where the time is really taken in the processing specimens and then starting to identify them. Again, at Morecambe Bay, we got some really nice things. Nice coastal dolichopodid flies, some nice species of shore bugs, soldier flies and caddis flies, and a variety of other things. This was quite an interesting job that we did a few years ago on the Isle of Wight, on the slumping cliffs. Now the cliffs are really moving quite rapidly, with in some places of 1 to 2 meters of slump in any particular year. So quite interesting in terms of risk assessments and making sure that we're constantly safe, because health and safety is a really important part of what we do. But a really fascinating bit of habitat. Very fresh-faced me there back at the start of my field unit career. Vicky pootering up spiders. But there you can see that, you know, the amount of erosion on the cliff there. And basically what the SSSI does to take this into account is every meter that it collapses, or every 2 meters it collapses, 2 meters is added onto the SSSI at the back. So it's a constantly sort of evolving bit of habitat, but offers all sorts of opportunities to a range of creatures. Again, as a sort of another view of part of those slumping, collapsing cliffs. Really interesting site. With some interesting invertebrates as well. So Separose groundhopper was found there in reasonable numbers, and the grey bush cricket, both things I don't come across in many other habitats. And also the Glanville fritillary. So sometimes there are absolute showstoppers that as soon as you see, you know, you thank your stars that you're able to go and do a survey like that, and finding the larvae as well. This is a job that we did in Surrey in Hampshire. This is a big military range called Ash Ranges. The local wildlife trust work with the Ministry of Defence to manage the site for invertebrates, and also for a number of other things like reptiles. Smooth snake is on there as well. So a really good partnership between stakeholders, the MOD, the local wildlife trust, and ourselves. This particular site is one of the best sites in Britain for spiders. There's areas of heath like this, slightly more mature heath and wet heath that have all sorts of interesting things. So some of these spiders, Uloborus and Epicynus, are nationally rare, and the Thomisus is a nationally scarce species. But probably the rarest thing is this thing called the lynx spider. which only occurs in that little area there on the map. So it's incredibly important to have an understanding of its ecology. So it turns out that the lynx spider likes a combination of very mature heather alongside some more open heather in which the youngsters forage. It's the sort of mature heathland that you might look at and think, actually this heathland is in really bad condition because it's not been managed. But if you did so, you may well wipe out populations of the spider. So it's really key to have that ecological understanding that you can take into the survey work that we do and be able to report back to land managers and other stakeholders of what is important and why. We also get to do species work from time to time. Some of that is part of our priority places work with area teams. On other occasions, we get contacted by people such as in this case, Kingley Vale National Nature Reserve in Sussex, who wanted us to look in the yew woodland that they have there. Fantastic yew woodland, and they have a really good population of something called the triangle spider. And so we went and did a survey over 2 or 3 visits and mapped the spider in the woodland, which helped them to know where it was. And obviously then that impacts on any management work they're going to do. To celebrate, we bought some triangular shaped chocolate and had a piece of that at the end with the site manager. We also got asked to help to survey the black hair streak in the Thames Solent area and part of the Chilterns. But rather than surveying the adults, we helped by bringing in a team of about 30 people to target egg searches, the annual egg searches that butterfly conservation do. And we were able to spot brown hair streak and black hair streak particularly, and help butterfly conservation map quite a large area, certainly more than they normally would be able to do, having provided 30 odd people to help with the survey. We also get the opportunity to volunteer in Natural England. We have a certain amount of days that we can spend volunteering with either partner organisations or other organisations, and we also have 3 days per year that we can spend as green letter days, again working with other groups. I try and do this whenever I can. It's not always easy because of the amount of work that we have to do, particularly around the country. But last year, I did a bit of work in a local site called Woolston Eyes, SSI. Invertebrates aren't a notified feature on that site. It's a fantastic bird reserve. But we had a suspicion, and Woolston Eyes volunteers had a suspicion that could be important for invertebrates. So I did a bit of survey work. I put my Malays strip out, did some sweeping and pitfall traps, and came across a new beetle to Britain. So that was a nice sort of unexpected consequence of that volunteering. Challenges. You've seen lots of nice sites and lots of nice species, and it's very easy to think that we have a very enjoyable life. But as with anything else in life, there are certain challenges. Getting access permissions to SSIs can be really complicated. You could have a site that has, I think there's one actually that's been surveyed this year. Thankfully, we aren't doing it, someone else is, where there are 50 odd different owners. And so you have to contact every single one and try and get permission, which can be really complicated, sometimes ultimately futile. We do have powers of entry, so we can access areas of land if we want to, with support from the police. Thankfully, that's the last resort, and it doesn't happen that frequently. I think I've done one job where I've had to use powers of entry, and the landowner just didn't want us on the land. He didn't want a proposed designation to happen, a redesignation of some of their land. so just constantly refused us access, but we did get powers of entry. So it can get a bit fraught at times, potentially. The amount of time away from home can be really, really tough. We take well-being incredibly seriously in Natural England, and so we have a bit of a limit on how long you can spend away at any one time. But obviously the field season is short, and there's you know, you want to do a good job and get around as many sites as possible, and that's another reason why sometimes we run jobs over 2 years, so that we can do it in a sustainable way. The weather, climate change is a bit of an issue. Too hot, too cold, late or non-existent springs or non-existent summers, rain. We are not allowed to work where there's a red alert that's been put out by the Met Office. And if there's an amber alert, then we have to take extra precautions to make sure that everybody is safe. And so we're constantly watching the weather forecast. I've certainly found this year, some sites in particular, I've had very, very few invertebrates on them, which presumably is a consequence of very hot weather last year and very cold weather at the start of this year. But we're still finding reasonable populations in some habitats, but certainly the grasslands we've done this year have looked like they're suffering a bit. An issue we have to be aware of is internal policies and health and safety. So 2023, we were unable to work from height. So we weren't able to do any ladder work for a year because of an issue that had happened somewhere else that very sadly resulted in a fatality. We have to have water safety training so that we can work safely in potentially quite dangerous habitats such as rivers and streams and ditches and coastal areas. There's a bit of a in-house fight at the moment about this, because the water safety training that we're being asked to undertake is quite expensive, and we have got a limited budget this year. So there's a bit of ongoing uncertainty as to which sites we'll be able to survey next year, dependent on whether we can do the water safety training or not. But as I say, we do take health and safety and well-being very, very seriously in the organisation, rightly so. There's also a lot of change going on at the moment in terms of SSI citations. These are the legal documents that protect a site. The citations are then turned into what are called monitoring specifications. They used to be called FCTs. And basically the monitoring specifications reflect what's important or what should be important on the site and tell us the features that we need to survey. So, and in terms of invertebrates, they are things called SATs, specific assemblage types. And so if I say something like W211 or W126 or F103 or anything like that, that's a SAT. And you'll see a little bit more of those shortly. That process has been ongoing for a few years and will continue this year. So we may well find that when we come to survey some sites next year, the monitoring specification has changed and some invertebrate assemblages have been taken out or added. So it's a constantly sort of changing process, and we're also feeding into that. And I'll show an example of that in a little while. We have to take biosecurity very seriously. Again, if we're traveling the length of the country and in Lindisfarne one day and the lizard the next day, we don't want to make sure we're not bringing anything from one site to the other. Also, dangerous animals, we encounter our fair share of those. I've got a rather different example to show you in a little while. And probably ticks are one of the increasing dangers, with more areas are subject to Lyme disease and what have you. So I'm certainly we're finding more ticks on sites than we probably used to. So it's something we have to bear in mind. There's a reporting system in Natural England. If you get bitten by a tick, you have to report it. So we're sort of on that. So this is piri piri. I don't know whether people have come across this before, but it's it's a non-native plant that occurs in some parts of the country. It's all over the Lindisfarne Reserve. And if you happen to sweep a net through it or close to it, you get absolutely covered in seeds. And it takes a good sort of 10, 15 minutes to remove them all. But the key thing here, as I say, if you're traveling around sites, you absolutely have to ensure that you're not taking any of this with you. You're not taking it on your nets or your socks or your clothes. So as I say, it's just one of the things we have to be aware of. This is a site called Kings and Hargreaves Wood. Some people may recognize those devices. They're called vein traps, and we use them to survey saproxylic beetles. And this is one of the working at height issues. Last year, we weren't allowed to use ladders like this because of that ongoing review after the fatality. And so we weren't able to do any vein trapping last year. We were all sort of set to go, dates booked in, cars booked, and all of a sudden we were told, no, we would have to not do that survey this year. These things happen, but there's plenty of other sites that need surveying, thousands of them actually, so we're never short of stuff to do. I think this is probably the most potentially interesting dangerous animal wildlife encounter we had. These are Barbary macaques. So Kings and Hargreaves SSI that I've just shown you part of, some of it, the SSI goes into the monkey forest at Trenton Gardens. And so we had to work out a time when we could go and work through the monkey forest with rangers. First bit of advice they gave us was not to put our bag down anywhere. Otherwise, a Barbary macaque would very quickly come over, steal it, and take it to the top of the tree. And then the other thing, the rangers were a bit uncertain about where our nets, our entomological nets, because they use very similar things to catch the Barbary macaques if they need vet treatment or anything like that. And so as soon as the macaques saw our nets, they started to kick off and were very, very vocal and moved away. So probably the nets meant we could crack on with our survey quite quickly and get done and then get out onto the next bit. This is this year's invertebrate survey work that the team are doing. So as you can see, I won't read them all out, but you can see a variety of sites across a variety of parts of the country. And normally we would all work together on these, but we've taken a slightly different approach this year. We split into little teams using the intake and people like Adrian and Julian to enable us to get round a few more sites than we normally would. This isn't obviously all the invertebrate work that occurs in a year. We actually outsource quite a lot to consultants via the SSI monitoring and evaluation team. So it's a combination of work we do internally, which are these sites, and then a whole host of other sites that have gone out to contractors and consultants. And as I said earlier, the pressure is on a little bit to get around as many of these sites and enable us to meet our obligations by 2028. There will be some sites that get done using third-party data, and that's something we're going to start to look at this winter. Personally, I would always try and get out on site because that's the best judge of the condition of the site, and then it ensures that we're surveying in a manner that allows us to comply with the methodologies for the SATs that we use to determine condition on SSIs. So this is how we tell if a site is favourable or not. We use a bit of online software developed with BRC and CEH and ourselves called Pantheon. And basically what Pantheon does, it provides a list of invertebrates that are classed as high fidelity to a range of habitats. So in this case, the W211 assemblage is a list of wetland beetles, wetland bugs, and a few other things. And we have to target those species by the most appropriate method, which is pond netting in this particular case. There's a group of 40-odd invertebrates that we can target for this particular habitat. We need to do this in the spring over a couple of visits, 2 or 3 visits. And the target to show that that assemblage is favourable is 6 species. So 6 of that list of 44 in this particular case will enable us to show that a site is favourable, or less than 6, then it's unfavourable. Our reporting works in this way. So this is Kirby Moor SSI in Lincolnshire. There is actually another SSI called Kirby Moor in Cumbria, so we have to make sure we don't confuse the two. So we basically look at the monitoring specification, and that tells us that on this particular site, the F001 scrub edge is an assemblage, W211 is, and there's also an outstanding dragonfly assemblage. And the survey work we did showed that the F001 was favourable, that the W211 was unfavourable. That unfavourability probably stems from lack of extent of habitat rather than anything. And we were able to access a lot of data from the Wildlife Trust site owner, who records dragonflies annually and has done for a decade or more. So we've got a very good set of data there that we could judge that the dragonfly assemblage is favourable, and probably very, very different to the one that was notified because of climate change and changes in dragonflies and damselflies. We also were able to say in this case that the F002 rich flower resource sat, the F003 scrub heath, and the F111 bare sand in this case were all favourable, and they don't appear on the monitoring specification. So as part of that ongoing review, we could recommend which of those should probably be added to the monitoring spec, which in this case was the F003, the scrub heath. It was massively favourable from our survey work. So that's the sort of result of what we do. We've done quite a lot of work recently with the Natural History Museum on DNA work. We've run DNA blitzes with them, starting in 2019 at Ainsdale on the Lancashire coast, the Buell Marshes in the Fens in 2022 in Norfolk, the Humberhead peatlands 2023, and the Wye Forest this year, 2024. And that supports both the UK Barcode of Life and the Darwin Tree of Life. The priority there is the Darwin Tree of Life. And basically what we do, we pitch up onto a reserve, we set up a lab alongside the Natural History Museum, and we go out in the field, collect live specimens, bring them back to the lab and try and identify as many live specimens as we can. And then they go over to our colleagues at the Natural History Museum, who have a group of people there, and they are basically cataloguing them, seeing whether they are new to their lists, and then they freeze them in liquid nitrogen and barcode them fairly quickly to get a full barcode. So it's been a really interesting project, being working with them and coming together annually for a big project. So that's great fun. Supporting that, we've done work on Section 41 species, the old UK BAP list with additions. This is a little project that Vicky, our entomologist, did last year. So she went to a few coastal sites in Norfolk and Kent, targeting a couple of species of spider, the whelk shell jumper and the sand running spider. These are photographs of them in the field that she took. So obviously she found both of those target species. I think the sand running spider particularly is just an absolute marvel of camouflage. Absolutely incredible photographs there from Vicky. And so obviously she found her targets for UK Bull. Also Chris did some work at Dungeness. Some of you will recognise that site, for Temnothorax interruptus, a pretty rare species of ant. And again, she was successful in finding it. I went down to a site called Rutcliffe in Sussex to look for the cheese snail, which is a quite uncommon species that's mostly restricted to the South Downs. This is a woodland on a sort of north-facing scarp of the South Downs. It's quite a steep woodland, and the managers aren't able to remove timber from it because of the access. So they generally cut it up and place it on the sides of the tracks or areas, similar areas, which is turned out to be absolutely wonderful for the cheese snail. So they're in really, really good numbers there. And what we did, we saw that there was a very decent population, hundreds of cheese snails around. So we took a couple, we put them in a pot and went to the local post office and posted them off to the Natural History Museum, where they arrived the next day, still in good condition, so they're able to sample them for the Darwin Tree of Life. We've also done a range of other things, including this species, Ellipteroides alboscutilatus, quite a rare crane fly associated with tufa. So we collected some specimens for UK Bowl in 2023 at Hoffwood, and then we found one specimen at the Wye Forest by a blitz this year. So we were, as it was a live specimen, we were able to put that into the Darwin Tree of Life. So we shall continue to do that for a little while, hopefully. We did quite a bit of training, invertebrate training across the organisation. And these are just a couple of examples of things we've done recently: the invertebrates of calcareous grassland, invertebrates of priority wetland habitats. We're actually back there next week to do some more of that with members of staff. So over the 10 years, we've put a lot of time and effort into supporting the intake. And obviously the idea of doing that is so that we can enable people who are relatively new starters to the organisation to gain some of those skills, teach them a bit of entomology, teach them what good looks like, show them important species, get them to contribute to fun things like the DNA blitzes, so that when they go back into their normal sort of day roles, they'll have a better understanding of entomology should they need it in the future. And some of them do actually take entomology up and come out with us in subsequent years. I think somebody titled that photograph the Beaufort scale of entomology. That's down in Dorset a couple of weeks ago. So we get the intake doing all sorts of stuff, and if I have the opportunity, I always try and run a moth trap, because not many of them have done that before, and it's a new experience. You see new species, get them out sweeping for the DNA blitz, and all sorts of other things that we do. So this on the left is a survey that we carried out at the site in Cumbria, where we're collecting beetles from dung, and also looking at leaf litter surveys and things like that. And pitfall traps, showing people how to set pitfall traps and to take the catch in. We've very recently been doing some work in Savernake Forest, and this was an amazing area with lots of wood spurge. So some of the intake came with me, and we were lucky enough to find the drab looper, section 41 species associated with wood surge, and also the spurge bug. And in fact, these photographs were taken yesterday. So that's how topical this is. Matthew Oates was doing a survey on the Purple Emperor yesterday, sort of cycling around the rides of Savernake. So it's good to see him. And we also did a bit of moth trapping yesterday. Another thing we do, we work with a range of organisations. This is a little project we ran last year, or helped to run, with the University of Exeter, where a student, Brogan, was tagging blue ground beetle with little radio tags, and we spent a bit of time helping him in the woodlands surrounding Dartmoor to sort of relocate them. He would do that in the afternoon and into the evening, and we helped him find and relocate some of the tagged blue ground beetles just to examine how far they'd travelled and the sorts of habitats that they use. Key to what we do is also making sure that the data is used, so that as well as the records going into our summary reports, they're all submitted onto iRecord so that they get accessed by recording schemes. And then sometimes in turn, that information gets used in status reviews. So my final slide is this. So the next 10 years, is there any certainty that there'll still be a field unit in 10 years? Who knows? We're at the whim of the politics of the day, really, and what our organisational priorities are, and what DEFRA wants us to do. So if we're around in 10 years' time, absolutely fantastic. We may not be, who knows? But whatever happens in 10 years' time, I'll hopefully still have my head in a net somewhere, though I'll certainly have retired before that time is up. So thank you very much for listening.